My name's William Raban. I'm Professor of Film, recently appointed Professor of Film, and I work in the Media School at London College of Communication. I teach film, and most of my work is now with PhD students, working with research students. It's a film that I've made since the beginning of 2012, and it's called Time and the Wave. And it's following on a way of working which I've developed with a few other films over the last 15 years or so, which is working with the chronicle form. So it's filming events and then putting them together, those events, putting them together so that it creates some kind of meaning about the condition of the country at large. So other events included in this film include the Occupy movement at St. Paul's, the protests there. And I was disappointed by the way in which a lot of the material that I saw on mainstream media tended to represent it, which seemed to be very carnivalesque. And so I deliberately went out there on stormy days when they were stopping their tents from being blown away, and late at night, one night when it snowed heavily. I filmed them in the cold and the snow because I felt I needed some kind of extremes of weather to get those shots. And the last part of the film, which I filmed yesterday around the Thatcher funeral, it comes from an idea I had from my last film, which is The Houseless Shadow, which takes a Charles Dickens essay, his Night Walks essay, and I offset his essay, the reading of that essay, with scenes of contemporary London at night in 2011 when I made the film. So it's a lot about homeless people on the streets, and the film shows that, in fact, London hasn't changed that much since the time of Charles Dickens when he was writing 150 years ago. And while I was researching The Houseless Shadow, I came across this extraordinary essay he had written called Trading in Death, and it was written on the occasion of the state funeral of the Duke of Wellington, the famous British general who defeated Napoleon, supposedly. And I thought, on the occasion of Margaret Thatcher's death, I knew she would be accorded a state funeral because Tony Blair, of all people, had set that up for her when he was Prime Minister. I thought it'd be fantastic to shoot scenes of the funeral, her state funeral cortege, but to a reading of passages from Dickens's essay, Trading in Death. And it's the most wonderful essay because he rails against the whole kind of opulent grandiosity of the Victorian funeral and the amount of, no expense spared. It's all about money, it's all about pomp and ceremony, which is exactly what the funeral yesterday was about. So it's a way of working that plays on irony, that you can do one thing on the soundtrack and you can do another thing on the picture. And what interests me in making films, it's the way in which sound can play off against an image, often using subtle forms of irony. It was very difficult. I spent 3 days looking for the right place to film it from, and I tried to work closely with the police. I had the support of the Museum of London, and I went to the Cabinet Office to try and get an official position from which to film. And initially they were very sympathetic to my request, and suddenly they said, no, we can't help you. And I think they investigated my email traffic in the last week or so, and of course, like everyone else, I'd sort of celebrated the fact that the Wicked Witch was dead. So maybe that didn't help. But what did trouble me a lot about the way in which the Cabinet Office organised the press is it seemed to me that they gave priority to BBC and Sky News. And they made it very difficult for people like me, independents, to come in and get good pictures. But I was lucky. I went out there at 6 o'clock yesterday morning, and I found a fantastic spot on Ludgate Hill, quite close to St. Paul's. It was within sight of St. Paul's Cathedral, also in sight of Ludgate Circus, where the demonstrators were. And I found a window ledge about just under a metre off the ground. And when I found that, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the streets were more or less empty. So I just got myself up into that window ledge and stayed there for 5 hours until I completed the filming. So I was able to look down. I thought, how do I film the funeral? It seemed inappropriate in a way to film it at eye level. I thought, given it's Margaret Thatcher, it would be appropriate to look down on the woman, not to look up at her. So I filmed from a fairly high viewpoint, so I was able to look down on the crowd surrounding the passing of the cortege. But the funeral itself, it was a real disappointment. It was more like a pageant than a funeral. I mean, it's a relief to have got this, because I knew I had to get Margaret Thatcher's funeral. I've known that for 2 years. I'm very lucky that I've had a very good working relationship with the Museum of London, who operate the Museum of Docklands now. They commissioned The Houseless Shadow, my last film. I really enjoyed working with them. Very nice people to work with who are commissioning work. And they decided maybe a couple of years ago that they wanted to do a big exhibition about the Thames Estuary. And it presented them with a problem, because the Thames Estuary is this huge expanse of open water. How do you make an exhibition out of a huge expanse of open water? And I think the curator hit on a very good idea, that they would commission, or not commission, but they would work with artists who have made works in that stretch of waterway. It's been very popular with a lot of artists. So this is what the Estuary exhibition is all about. It foregrounds the work of contemporary artists, painters, filmmakers. My film is a film I made in 1986 called Thames Film, which is about, and it takes in a lot of the Thames Estuary. It's about the relationship of the City of London to the open. The museum asked me to make a 20-minute version of that film. The full length of the film is 66 minutes. And to run as a continuous installation, that's too long for an exhibition. So forget the rules and be experimental.
Excellent.
No, because I think a lot of the formal pieces I did through the London Filmmakers Co-op in the early 70s, I think they are very political works, but they're about the politics of the audience as much as politics of content. So I think I would say my work's always had a political motivation. It's a good question. And I think maybe now, yes, probably my work is more, could be seen as being more overtly political, but one of the ways I work, you see, is that I don't like to be didactic. I'm against didacticism as a method. So if I was to make an overtly political film, I wouldn't want to have my politics or a particular political point of view imposed to the audience through the soundtrack. I like to play with film material. And I think the best way to be political in filmmaking is to credit the audience with intelligence, that they can pick up meaning through the combination of image and sound, rather in the way in which I was talking about using irony for the Thatcher funeral.